Hi everybody. I'll start off with my introduction first. My name's Anne Orman. I'm the photographer for the book. What I've done behind us, just to give you a little kind of feel for it, is just giving you a full range of images from the book. I thought that's kind of the easiest thing. We were going to do some behind the scenes stuff, but I kind of like the power of the images that we've got. And this is our team, so it's going to whiz through from now. And Jannine's going to talk a little bit more about our team. So anyway, so what I thought I'd start off with is me and my background. So I'm a commercial photographer. I changed careers about 15 years ago, and prior to that, I had this idea. I had a lot of creative friends, and I was buying a lot of art at the time. I was in a more lucrative career than I am at the moment, but I'm doing okay. And one of my friends who's in the book is Anita Blanchet, and I'd photographed her in her studio. I'd also bought a piece of art of Piera MacArthur, who we tried to get for the book, but she's in her 90s and we couldn't get her. But I remember meeting Piera when I bought her art, and I thought, oh my God, I want to photograph you. She was in her 80s. She had these hands that were beautiful. Her art is wild, and she'd lived in Paris and done all those sorts of things. And that's kind of where the seed of the idea came from. And I had a bunch of female friends that I thought, I really want to celebrate these women, and I want to do it in a book. I had no idea how it was going to look. If I was going to do this by myself, it would not have happened. So the theme of today is Kismet, and Kismet because Jannine and I met by chance at a work do who Jannine works for, and my partner works there as well, and we were at the Christmas do, and Jannine and I started chatting, and that was it. My partner came up to me and said, are you guys going to talk to anybody else? And we went, nope. And the birth of the idea came together with the book, and we just went, yeah, let's do this. So I will refer to my notes because I have a brain with so many full boxes in it. So about the book, a lot of the artists that we met in the book were also a kismet. There were people that I knew, but there were people that we didn't know. And we kind of went into it quite blind, of not knowing what it was to create a book, which I think if anybody's going to do a book, you kind of do it and then go, wow, would I do it again if I knew what you do, because now you know, but it's a pretty intense experience. So with the artists that we have in the book, as I said, that we have a number of women I had already known, so we started off with those ones. And then after 12 months, Jannine and I just sat down and got really clear on all the categories in the book of people that we wanted. We got really clear that we wanted to do a book about women who fly under the radar. So this wasn't the Trelise Coopers or the Karen Walkers that we all know. This was women with really successful creative careers doing amazing things. And so the criteria it was what I call intelligent art, where they do something you go, oh my God, how did you come up with that? So we've got people like Hannah Jensen, who's a paint carver. We have a Punamu carver, but her work is quite alternative, and a whole range of artists in there. And we wanted to be very specific about the categories. So you didn't only have painters, you didn't just have drawers, you didn't have, what other categories are there? We've got a winemaker and a jeweler and a florist and a paint carver, 34, and we could have gone on forever. So we had to get really clear on what the genres were. We both needed to love the art, so we had to love what they do. And then the last one, which was a very expensive part of the process, is, oh my God, I want to buy a piece. So we have a lot of art in our whole process, in our apartments, in our homes. So I think that kind of explains my part. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jannine. Just a little bit of my background in terms of writing and that sort of thing. This was a very new experience for me. I've always, since I was little, wanted to write a book that would give people joy, and when they read the words and look at, obviously in this case, the beautiful pictures. So for me, it's fulfilled something that I've wanted to do all my life. The process behind the book was quite organic. Like, we sort of had to make it up as we went along to some degree. And I think, also if we'd known what was actually involved in going through the publishing phase and all of that, I'm not sure that we would have sort of kicked it off, but we got ourselves there. each of the artists, from my perspective, from a writing perspective, I had to research who they were, what has happened in their lives that I could find online, and then interview them all, which in some cases was 3.5, 4 hours of sitting there having a conversation. And we made sure that it was a conversation, not an interview as such, and that was to get the artists comfortable. There was a few of them that felt very sort of wary or very nervous about the process. We did video them all as we went through as well, so we've got quite a lot of content around some of those conversations that we had. I was blown away by these 34 women, that none of whom I had met before, and they were all very open, and they were very, and I was lucky that I could get them to be very comfortable and tell us some things along the way that some of them haven't quite made the book, but it made it a very intimate sort of process, and I was quite humbled by how open, you know, some of these women were. We had 2 other people join the team, thank goodness, we've said many times. So Laura Skerritt, who came on board, and she's been instrumental in setting up our social media and also our website and that sort of thing. So she twiddled her fingers and it just all happened. Thank goodness, because it's not my forte. The other member of the team was Karen Modrica. I happened across her in an event similar to this. It was at the Marketing Association, and you know how it is, you start talking to people, and that was sort of how she came on board. And she works for a publishing company, a children's book publishing company. So she was critical in terms of helping us decide what the book was actually going to look like. And there's an amazing array of things that you have to think about when you are putting a page together, like where the text ends and all of this sort of stuff. And her depth of detail was just incredible. She also was instrumental in helping us with the layouts of the pages, what sort of text we were going to use, where the images were going to be, although her and Anne spent an enormous amount of hours deciding on what each and every page in that book was going to look like. And she was also the one that I guess discovered the image on the front of the book, which is this one here. And we sort of looked at 2 or 3, and then when this one came up, we just knew that this was going to be the most striking image that we could have that explained what the book was actually about. She was sort of instrumental in showing us that.
And without going into one genre. Do you know, we wanted to have something that was kind of universal. Yeah. Oh, that's me. So about the images, which is the image on the cover. As Jannine says here, we explored a few of those. My style is very much, I love photographing people. I love photographing and getting them connected to themselves before I photograph them, so they feel super comfortable. So as we walked into each of the artists, we were in Cromwell, we were in Queenstown, we were in Aotearoa. And so we only had probably 2 or 3 hours to do the interview and also to photograph them. And so for the photography, I limited myself pretty much down to 45 minutes to capture all the images for the artists. On the odd occasion, I would go back to some of the artists, only because they didn't have something really specific to their art process set up. For example, Kiri Nathan, who, now I should have got this right, the cloaks, Kurawai, I was right. So she didn't have one of those set up to photograph, so I went back to see her to photograph her doing that process. And then some I'd go back to, and because I did a second shooting and I was there, I'd be there for a couple of hours. Because the other thing that I absolutely love is photographing people in general and artisans. So part of so that's her work there, and she just works out of her home. All these artists, I think there's only a handful that had their own studios. Part of my style is I love photographing hands, so I also photograph artisans through the South Pacific. Just before we went into lockdown, I'd just been to the Solomon Islands, and we'd managed to find some artisans in those environments that actually hadn't been photographed before, which was pretty cool. So photographing this book was an absolute passion. I love it. I love art, I love hands, I love people, I love the shallow depth of field. So when you have a look at something, you only see like the ring. These images don't do justice. Do have a look at the book because they're a lot clearer. But that's my style, and that kind of weaves into my corporate stuff as well. There were 18,000 images taken for the book, and we used 350 in the book, to give you a bit of an idea. And so when it came down to doing the selection process, we started off that Kieran would print out all of these big contact sheets with all the images that I'd selected, cut it down to, and then we'd all go through and look at them. But it was getting that we were starting to get quite busy, and so I actually passed that over to Kieran, who was, honestly, Kieran was just amazing. She had the ability to look at the image and see where it fitted on the page because she had a visual for layout. I don't do InDesign, so I've been sitting there for 4 years to learn how to do InDesign, but now that we've got Kieran, and so she would work out where the image sat on the page and then we'd move it around. And the first, if you have a look at the book, the first one in there is an artist called Philippa Bentley. And when we nailed down that layout with the images and how it all sat together and the story and the fonts and everything, we just both sat there and went, oh, that's it. Because photography for me is about a feeling. You photograph what you feel. And so when that page came together, we went, right, we've got the layout, we know, and that became the précis for the rest of the book. So every layout that we did for each artist had to have powerful images and images that made it go, oh, that's it. And so we went, right, we don't really need to work on that. And the other thing was about actually showcasing the artists themselves, but also the workspace. So I went from wide to mid to detail shots because we wanted to pull you guys, or people that see the book, to pull you in and actually see how an artist works and what their setup is, and the same with the stories. So.
Yeah, so with the stories I mentioned before, there was quite a bit of research that went on before we even sort of sat down and had our conversations with them. And I did actually, for each creative, I did actually have some set questions. Some of them wanted to see the questions beforehand so that they could be a little bit prepared. Others winged it, a little bit like we did. And that was a really enjoyable part of the writing process, was just sort of trying to find out details on some of the women. Some of them were prolific online and there was a lot of content, to sort of pick up. Some of them had no presence online at all, so it was really difficult to even know how to sort of start that conversation with them and sort of get out of them details that I didn't even know perhaps were there. I mentioned too the trust and the openness of these creators. Creators are sort of a very sort of humble, almost withdrawn in some cases, and trying to draw their life story out, that sometimes got quite emotional, was a really part of the process that I really, really enjoyed. The writing process itself, I often got out of the interview or conversation, got into the car, and my mind would just be full of the story of this creative and how I wanted to portray that person. And sometimes I would be driving home and the story would be writing itself in my head, and I'd get home and I'd just sort of like dump everything I was thinking onto the paper. And I guess that's my writing process, is just write your thoughts down and then try and put them in some order after that. And my biggest challenge that I put on myself was how to do justice to each of these women and the stories and the trust that they had given me with some quite personal detail. Because I hadn't sort of written that much before, and certainly not put anything out there in the public space, the first time I had to pass the stories over to be edited by 6 other people was really quite confronting, and I had massive amounts of self-doubt about whether the stories were actually any good. So all 4 of us in the team went through those stories. I think I've gone through them 14, 15 times to make sure that they are correct. So if anyone finds a spelling mistake, I'm going to be devastated. So we also had some external help with that as well. A couple of women came on board just to help go through and edit the stories and make suggestions for change and that sort of thing. And then it was presented to Kieran and Anne, who sort of were going through the how it all fits together process and the layouts and all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, it was a pretty intense time for me. I didn't write the stories in any order. I just wrote them as I felt that connection with the artist, and I found that once I'd got my idea or my theme for that particular story, the story would just come out. Some of them were more difficult than others, but then, you know, some people are a little bit more forthcoming and have, you know, some interesting content about their life and their art and that sort of thing. I also learned a lot about the creatives' work. There was one that comes to mind, God, I've forgotten the name, with the black statues and...
Vicky Savage.
Vicky Savage, I should know that. So Vicky Savage does these beautiful, beautiful bronze sculptures. They're gorgeous, and you can only find them up in the Parnell Art Gallery, I think. And she took us through the process that's called the lost wax process, and I got quite a way down the track when I was doing the research on that process about what it all meant. And it's really fascinating to find how these women get to the point that they get to with their particular art. So Hannah Jensen, you know, layers 50, 60 sort of layers of paint onto a canvas and then carves into these different colours or different layers and makes the most beautiful tactile paintings. It's a fascinating thing to watch. So yeah, I was really quite humbled to be allowed to represent these women and tell their life stories. It was great. Publication, that was just a whole nother world of its own. So many things come to mind. We had no idea what we were doing. Luckily, again, we had Kieran. She was very pivotal in this part of the process. We realised too that as part of that whole thing, we couldn't possibly travel around the country, just the two of us, and try and sell this book into bookshops and things. So we linked in with Bateman Publishers and met Paul Bateman.
Mind you, just to go back a step, because we really wanted to publish in New Zealand. We really tried to find a publisher in New Zealand, we thought. And initially, we thought, oh, we'll just do 500 books and see how it goes. And then obviously this thing just grew out of, you know, into something way bigger than both of us. And we actually went around a number of printers in New Zealand, in Auckland, to try and find a printer that could do it at a cost that was that would work for selling the book. But the printing cost became just prohibitive, and it ended up being the cost of the actual book itself to sell it. So you have to be selling it nearly to $200, you know, $150, $200. And so that didn't work. So we really looked around, and that's when Bateman's came into the picture.
Yeah, they were very generous with their help too, given that all they were doing was distributing. We weren't...
Does anybody know who Bateman's are? Some people know. So Bateman's they're a printing company, book publishing company, and distributing company. So for us, what the beauty of what they did is that they already had links we printed in China, so they had links to China. They would actually commission people to do books, but we didn't want that. We wanted complete ownership of the whole process of the book. We right down to the cover of the book. We wanted that look and feel. We wanted the hands on the cover, the title of the cover, the quality of the paper, the whole process. If we were to be published by somebody else, they would dictate a lot of those factors, and we're like, no. We wanted to have complete ownership over the whole thing, and Bateman's allowed us to do that. So
yeah. They were pretty helpful actually in taking two very ignorant people through that process, and I think they probably had a few heavy sighs along the way when we were asking that. We were in there all the time.
Asking questions.
Talk about when we went in there and you were proofing the images for the last time.
So the thing about digital printing is that as a digital photographer, everything's done in sRGB, so if you know digital. But everything has to get converted in printing to CMYK. And in CMYK, it converts the colour process. And so I was paranoid. I'd heard stories of people doing this. I had been talking to a photographer in New York, Joey Lawrence, who's incredible. And he said, yeah, he'd done this book and he'd printed in China and he'd got it back and all the colours had mucked up the purple in it. And so they went to print again in China, and because of the content, it was on Kazakhstan. And so they said, no, it's because we're not doing that in China. We had to go to Italy. And I'm like, oh my God, if I don't get this right, we've got deadlines, we've got particularly printing deadlines. So I had all the printouts that we'd done on the book, which is on just a digital printer. But then I had to make sure that the quality of the print, so I actually found a print specialist and went and saw him, and he said, the quality of the files that you've been provided with by Kieran, because Kieran had done the output, he said, you should be bang on. Bateman's had been working with this printer in China for 30 years. So we kind of knew that was a confidence there as well. And then when the first, honestly, Jannine and I were at one point, I sat there and I had been through these sheets, I don't know how many times. You know, we had 4 different book blocks and we'd pull out one and, one image out of one of them, put another one in, so they could have a proof to go, this is the colour for each of the image, because I've got to get it right for the artist as well. This is the artist's painting. They've chosen these colours for images in the book, for their own art, so we've got to get that and do justice to that. And I remember sitting in Bateman's and I was just in tears. I was exhausted. I was beside myself. I don't think COVID had hit yet, had it?
No, that came a bit later, I think.
That came a little bit later. But I remember just sitting there and I lost it, because I was just like, I'm exhausted, and I just had to let it go. And when we got the first copy back, I went, bang on, it was perfect. But you have a few sweat and tears just to get to that process. But once you find someone, a partner that you can trust, and Bateman's were just incredible to work with. So
yeah. I would definitely go back and use them again if we were doing something else. We've often been asked if
these are very yellow, so that's what I'm talking about. You never know, these tones, so you never know what's going to come up in the book. Sorry.
I forgot what I was going to say now. Yeah, so we've often been asked, is there another book sort of thing? I think we're certainly, if we did something, we would certainly be going in with our eyes a lot more open than last time, but also I think with a lot more confidence too, because of what we learnt along the way. We learnt that you cannot check things too often, like 12 edits of the text and God knows how many of the images, and bringing people in that can help you to learn. The best word I learnt the whole time was this word called an ozzolid, and I had no idea what an ozzolid even was. And if you don't know, it's a type of proof that you get to check that the layouts are actually where, like the images are where they should be, and and all of that sort of stuff. But I just sort of loved that. I loved that word. When we were doing the layouts too, we had printouts, double-page printouts of each artist, and I think there's an image in the front of the book when it talks about our story, and it shows our dining room and lounge, and it's just covered in these images, and we were walking around them, putting them in an order, and saying, now who do we want first up in the book? Who do we want here? How do we sort of figure out the order of the images in the book? And it actually wasn't as hard as we thought it was going to be.
No, and to do justice to the artists, because some of the artists, we wanted a range. So Tess Costello, when we interviewed her, I think she was 20, maybe 21 at the time. Claudia Pont-Ely is 75, and she's got if you probably know Claudia Pont-Ely, a very rich history in her story. I mean, the two stories couldn't be further apart. I mean, Tess Costello is the very beginning of her process, and when Jannine we interviewed Claudia, she's, it was 4 hours of interview, and it's like, what do we choose to put in the book? Because she's a pretty powerful woman as an artist. She's a filmmaker and a writer. And then we also wanted to try and cover as much of New Zealand as we could. We wanted to have Indigenous as well as European in the book. So we wanted to try and get as much of a mix as possible, but also without kind of isolating anything. That was probably the trickiest process, because we got to the end, we go, what about all these other genres? And we went 34. This book is going to be jam-packed. It's already, 320 pages? Yeah, so it's pretty full, yeah.
We had some creatives that were contacting us towards the end of the process, asking if they could be part of the book, but it was at a time when we'd already said, like, we actually have to now make a book, not just keep going and talking to people and photographing them.
And it was 4 years. This is a people go, you're going to do another book? I'm like, this is 4 years. This is 4 years of, I'm working full-time as a commercial photographer. Jannine's working full-time as well. So we managed to pull this together, and there'll be times that we'd both just disappear off the radar because we're just so entrenched in our, the other parts of our lives. So, yeah.
That also impacted the release of the book, and we were really excited to finally send it to print. Like, that's it, it's done. We felt a little bit lost after that, actually, because we didn't really have anything more to do. So we set our minds to deciding what we were going to do in terms of a launch. Unfortunately, COVID got in the way, and we never actually have done a proper book launch, which was really disappointing. But we were able to, through the company that I work for, one of the things that we do is look after the maritime, or look after the seas, safety of the seas around New Zealand and Australia. And we have some technology that enables us to track ships. So we were able to look at the boat that the books were coming down from China on and track it. And every day I was ringing up the operations centre and going, where is it? Where is it? And they were giving me little images
it's you again.
Yeah. And we even have an image of the boat sitting at port here in Auckland waiting to be unloaded. And so that was quite cool.
And I look over the ports from where I live, so I could see the boat itself out the window, which was pretty cool.
So we were sort of forced to use social media a lot in terms of a release, and we did a session one night with all of the artists themselves, and we had about 20-something of them on a Zoom call that went for 2 or 3 hours, I think, in the end. And everyone sort of wanted to sort of have their say about what the process was like for them and what they thought about it. And it was a really neat session to be able to get all of the creatives together and get them to hear others' challenges and things
because a big part of what we wanted to do is we wanted to create a community for artists. We wanted to create a community for female artists to connect, and we really wanted to have a launch where all the artists came together from around New Zealand and connected with each other, and so they had this community that they could call on if they needed it, because it does, you're working by yourself as a creative. Who's a creative here that works by themselves? Anybody? Yeah, so you know what it's like, you kind of work away what you do, and it's kind of nice, and you reach out and you go and have coffee with someone, you haven't got workmates around you, and you kind of rely on yourself. So we wanted to create that. So when COVID hit, we didn't know whether the books were going to turn up in time, because our release date was October, and the books, you know what was happening with freight, so we didn't know. Luckily, ours turned up super early, so we had, pallets of books to distribute. We had 2,000 books. So that happened, and then we couldn't, so we still haven't been able to get all the creatives together, which is hence we did it online, but we really wanted to try and get them face to face and connect. So it's a bit of a shame, but we got the book out, and yeah.
We started featuring each of the artists too through our Instagram and Facebook pages. So we had a Meet the Artist Monday, and every Monday we would put up one of the creatives and just sort of talk about their work and show some of the images that you'll see in the book. So we sort of had to find our way through it, but then a lot of people have had to find their way through COVID and what impact that has. We were pretty lucky in the end. I think the most frustrating part was that the books had got here, but we couldn't do anything with them. They were sitting in storage, waiting for like 2 or 3 months, I think it was, wasn't it?
So we got masked up by that first window of opportunity. Yeah. Jannine and I got masked up, and then we went out and socially distanced delivered to the actual artists themselves. And the following week, it got a little bit more relaxed, and we could actually deliver out to people themselves. So, yeah.
That delivery thing too was really important. We've sort of done that from an Auckland perspective. Unfortunately, we couldn't do it anywhere else. But if there's an order that comes through for someone that's in Auckland, we personally deliver them. You'll see at the back there's a sample of how they're beautifully wrapped. So it's been very humbling in terms of the reaction from people about the book, the images, the stories, and we're extremely proud of what we've achieved. So I hope you guys really, really enjoy the results of it.